Welcome everyone to the House Healthcare Committee. It is Friday, March 3rd, and we are going to take up H206 this morning with a small amendment, and we're going to vote on it, and then we're going to do a discussion about suicide prevention and the work we're going to do when we get back from break. And we have with us on the line Jennifer Karby, Legislative Counsel. So she's going to walk us through changes and additions to 206, which is on the committee page. So Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Jennifer Karby, Legislative Counsel. The camera that is not working. But I am able to share my screen. Do you want to start, Madam Chair, with the H206 amendment, or do you want to start with the additional language?
Let's start with, why don't I start with the additional language while we're doing it, and then you can do all at once. Does that work? Right? Is that the plan?
So I have not put the additional language in, but it's just a matter of copying and pasting it in if you decide to go with it. So do you want to look at that language first?
Yes, let's look at that language first.
Okay.
And so the language that she's bringing up, if you remember during the budget process, Mary Kate Molman from Bi-State had requested language be added to the budget. And the language was around asking DEVA to continue working towards solution where they come to agreement on how they get paid. At the time that we were working on the budget Wednesday and with the deadline, that language was not approved by both parties. So I just said we're not going to do it at that point. But they have since come together on the language, both DEVA and Bi-State. Ginger is here from DEVA. We have an email from both DEVA and Bi-State that they agree to this language. So because it is related to DEVA, I'm asking that we look at the language and vote to include it in 206. I don't know if we have to vote to include it. We have to agree to include it and then vote on it with the full 206. So Jen will walk us through the language.
Okay, so you should be able to see the language on your screen. And this is a section that would potentially go in to H206 on FQHCs and alternative payment methodology in a report. So this would direct the Department of Vermont Health Access to collaborate with representatives of Vermont's federally qualified health centers, FQHCs, to develop a mutually agreeable alternative payment methodology for Medicaid payments to the FQHCs. And then on or before December 15th of this year, the department would provide a progress report on the development of the methodology to this committee and to the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare.
So that's it.
So I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know the current methodology. So how do I find that out? If I'm thinking of it as a reporter, I would have to acknowledge that the current methodology is insufficient or.
Yep. So we can talk offline about that without a problem since you're reporting the bill. Yes. Yep. And Mary Kate talked about it a bit in her testimony, but with everything we've been through, it was, yes, so this is just saying the two parties need to go meet and come back and provide us an update on what's happening. Any other questions? Everyone okay adding this to the language? There's no cost to it. It's they've all agreed to it. It's pretty straightforward.
And where's that language? I just need it.
It will go into H206. And so we will see a version of that.
So I'm literally copying and pasting it in right now. So it will show up in what I will put up on the screen, although not what's online right now.
I have a process question.
Absolutely.
206 was proposed and written.
Yep. 206 was in.
This is amending it. Unless it's a strike-all amendment.
It is.
It is.
It is.
It is. Okay. Done. Yep. All right. That's.
And it's also the housekeeping.
I wondered why we're adding it to the bill.
So it needs a home. And this is a DEVA bill and it relates to DEVA. So I went to our legislative counsel and asked if it was appropriate to put it on this bill. And she said, absolutely.
No, that's fine. But I didn't know if it, I'm still a little fuzzy after 3 years.
Oh, I'm fuzzy. And yeah.
You have a bill we're amending it,
What do you have to do?
do you physically change the bill, or do you leave that amendment out? And once it's approved, then you change the
Yeah,
bill?
that's why we have legislative counsel.
Yeah. That's fine.
Sorry, I'm fuzzy as well.
Aren't we just adding a section in that to the
Yeah,
bill?
so maybe it would be helpful to put up this proposed strike all
That would be great.
and go through
Okay.
it.
Just
Because
strike all
that's
of it.
right. So what may be confusing is what we just went over was some standalone language that because you hadn't talked about it when you talked about H206, I didn't put it into the amendment. But now that you have just talked about it and asked to put it in, I've put it into the amendment, which was a strike all amendment. So it would go as the
Different deal.
House Health Care recommendation on H206. You would have a recommendation of amendment that you strike all and do this new version. All right. So hopefully you can see it on the screen.
Well, it's 2 pages. Can you make it one?
Yep. Oh, yep. Let me just make it bigger and then it will default to, it's because you're seeing it on my very
Yes.
big monitor. All right. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is H206. It is a strike all amendment, and I have highlighted the changes you have not looked at yet based on your conversation yesterday and some things that came up as I was going through it. So the first is around the Medicaid coverage for dental services. This is section 1. And as we talked about yesterday, this amendment does 2 things. First, it splits subdivision 2 into 2 pieces. One of them relates specifically to what is covered and subject to the cap, and it adds that language that you had looked at yesterday. Exceptional medical circumstances include emergency dental services, and then we added as defined by the department by rule. So this specifically directs them to figure out through the rulemaking process what their definition of emergency dental would be. And then it creates a subdivision B saying who is not subject to the annual maximum benefit amount. So the following individuals would not be subject to the annual maximum benefit amount. That's the cap. And those are individuals served through the CRT, the Community Rehabilitation and Treatment and Developmental Disabilities Services programs, and then Medicaid beneficiaries who are pregnant or in the postpartum eligibility period. And I just made some really what I would actually call technical corrections or changes to this provision to more accurately reflect both the types of programs that CRT and developmental disability services are and their relationship to the global commitment demonstration, and also just to take out the word waiver because that's not technically what they're called. So this would now say for this group, individuals served through the Community Rehabilitation and Treatment and Developmental Disability Services programs pursuant to Vermont's Global Commitment to Health, Section 1115 demonstration. And I ran this language by DEVA to make sure it was accurately reflecting the terminology that I had also taken from Vermont's Global Commitment application, most recent application to the federal government. So I was pretty sure it was right, but wanted to check with them. Any questions on this, which, as I said, is largely technical, other than the as defined by rule?
Any questions, concerns? Do you want to comment, Ginger?
Yeah, Ginger Irish, Department of Vermont Health Access. Just wanted to say that we support these changes and really appreciate Ledge Council and the chair and the committee working with us to align the language.
Great.
All right, we will go to the next section. Section 2 had 2 different sections of statute in it. This is around Medicaid's role as the payer of last resort and the relationship with insurance for claims that are later determined to have been insurance eligible. So for the most part, there are no changes to what was introduced other than the editors asked if I wanted to add a conjunction in here between an insurer shall not do either of these things. And so I did add in the conjunction or. They shall not do A or B.
Just so you know, we kind of broke out into song here on that one. You know, from the
Hey.
old, old conjunction junction, what's your?
Oh.
It's been a long week.
All right, and then we have section 3. This is the section around who has query access to the Vermont prescription monitoring system. And based on the conversation you had yesterday, this takes out the proposed change, adding the pharmacy director, and then just specifies that it would be the medical director's designee. So it would now read the medical director of the Department of Vermont Health Access and the director's designee for purposes related to Medicaid. Questions on that? And then just added in this FQHC language that we looked at. So that wasn't in the bill as introduced, but we just looked at it and I popped it in here and made the effective date section 5.
Great.
That is it.
So for Maury and Daisy, who are not in the room, can you just go back to that language we just added, Jen, real
Oh,
quick?
sure.
At the bottom. So if you remember during the budget, there was a request by Bi-State to add language to direct DEVA and Bi-State to work together on their payment methodology. There was no agreement on that language when we finished our budget letter. But then this was agreed to by both parties, and so we are going to put it in the DEVA bill so that it can happen. So it's just asking them to work together and then to come back to us with a progress report. Great. So how about a draft number for Maury? We have a draft number.
Sure. I will just take the highlighting out of this and we'll keep it as 1.3 because 1.2 is the one that's posted online. So you can make it 1.3. I will take it down and
Great.
And what time, Jen?
12. We'll make it 12:16. 12:16 p.m.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Now's a good time for me to come back in there to vote.
Yes, please. I just texted you. Please.
Yeah, I saw that, but I figured I would ask to. All right, I'll see you in a second.
Okay. We have a moment to come back in.
And Leslie will be the.
Leslie will be the reporter. So this will be on notice the Tuesday we come back on the floor Wednesday and Thursday. So Maury, you can start when you're ready and just call Brian last.
Okay.
All right, I'm sorry, we need a motion.
Oh, that's right.
I move to adopt H206.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Representative Rebecca,
Yes.
Representative Cordis, yes. Representative DeMar,
Yes.
Representative Farley Rubio,
Yes.
Representative Goldman,
Yes.
Representative Peterson,
Yes.
Representative Chena,
Yes.
Representative McFawn, Representative Black,
Yes.
Representative Houghton.
Yes.
The motion passes on a vote of 901.
Great, thank you, everyone. So, like I said, I think we have worked really hard these past 7, 8, I don't even know how long we've been here. So I want to get everyone out of here for break, but I do want to have a quick committee discussion. So we're not going to walk through H283. So H283 was introduced by Representative Black with a sign-on from several people in this committee. A lot of people on this. I think everyone in this committee. And so there's quite a couple pieces to the bill. It proposes to establish a special fund for the 988 line, establish a 988 crisis response commission, establish a suicide fatality review team, require crisis telephone numbers to be printed on student ID cards, require faculty and staff members to receive suicide and awareness training, raise the universal service charge by 0.4% and earmark that revenue to the 988 line, require a report on a reciprocal call diversion, and appropriate funds for a statewide peer respite and other suicide prevention activities. Everyone can read the bill. But because there's revenue in here, and more specifically, there is the proposal to add money to a special fund, this would have to go to both Ways and Means and Appropriations. I am not in favor of putting money into a special fund. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a committee bill, and we will take the pieces from 283 that we as a committee agree to put forward and others onto a committee bill. Therefore, it will not have to go to Ways and Means. We may still put money in it, and if we do, it can go to appropriations. But it will not, to be able to do all of this in the time we have, to have to go from our committee to Ways and Means to appropriations, I just don't think would happen before crossover.
Being new here, okay.
Yeah.
So there will be no more 283. It'll be a committee
It'd be a committee bill, yes.
with a new number.
With a new number, yes, yes. Daisy?
Can you explain a little bit the process of the special fund and other mechanisms?
Yeah,
that we've
so-
used and why?
So I talked to, well, one, we would need to take testimony about why we need a special fund for 988. 988 is funded through the Department of Mental Health. We're recommending there's additional funding. So I'm not even sure there is a need for that. It's also, after talking with the chair of Ways and Means, it's also from a fund that is not covering what it should be covering today anyway. And so, and I don't know what the fund is. I don't have all of those details, but it would be very hard for additional money to then be, it's already a fund that's in trouble revenue wise. And so part of it is timing, in that if we want to put forth some key things for suicide prevention, we need to pick and choose what's going to get through before crossover. We can always come back at another time and take testimony and determine that, hey, we do want to set up a special fund for something. But I think there's enough the committee wants to do outside of that to move this bill forward. Does that help, Daisy?
A little bit.
Yeah. Another question.
Hold on, Brian and then Alan.
You can go first.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think this is wise, but if others don't understand it yet, I think they deserve an explanation. I think it's wise to try to minimize the stops along the way, considering the deadline. Because the crossover for our committee, St. Patrick's Day, then it has to go to the money committees, and then they have a week to get it out, and they're gonna have like 30 or 40 bills that come flooding in. So they may not get to them all. So I think if anything we can do to remove the Ways and Means and make, there most likely is going to be an appropriation.
Right.
But that's easier because then they will look at that in the context of all other appropriations, and that's different than trying to do both.
Thank you.
And then the other thing is I just want to express appreciation that the chair is explaining really clearly how this committee bill is working and where it's coming from, because that has not happened in other committees, as people heard me complain about on the floor. And I just think it's important that members of a committee understand what happens. And I think you made it really clear. We're taking an existing bill, we're taking pieces of it, we're putting it in another. This is not coming out of like the shadows. And so I just appreciate the transparency.
Thank you. And I think when we all first came together, I said I would try to never surprise the committee. And that's part of why I'm taking the time to walk us through this.
Yeah.
And Daisy, if anyone else needs more, explanation behind it, let's talk.
So my question is, this is the bill proposes to establish a fund, but I heard you say that the fund is already in trouble.
So
That's confusing.
So I believe the fund is currently, there's a tax on like landlines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that tax sort of
Doesn't
goes
exist.
to several things. And clearly it's getting smaller and smaller and
Right.
smaller. So it proposed to add an additional tax onto that to fund this, just so that there would be sustainable funding going forward for 988, and it would sort of be held separate from.
Got it. I'll read
But there's
it all
a,
first.
it's under rate of charge. So when I said establish, it would establish a special fund under a fund that's already established.
Okay, got it.
And we don't know, we have not taken testimony that we are underfunding 980.
Got it. Thank you.
So just so I understand, sorry, taking this, so Alyssa, you said that the tax was on landlines and looking for an additional tax also on landlines or on something else?
Additional tax on landlines.
With landlines?
Yeah.
But is that landlines gonna continue to decline?
That's why it's in trouble. And so that's why we are not going to.
Okay, sorry.
use that. That's okay, but that's exactly why.
Okay.
We're getting rid of landlines.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Just, I would just suggest that we pick up the piece of the financial sustainability of it later,
yes.
you know, just to get the policy stuff. It doesn't mean we have to even stop talking about this.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, so,
We do,
and
yeah.
we are, so,
Yeah.
so let me talk about what we already have scheduled for when we come back. So, this could, subject to change, but we are going to look at post-vention services. So we're going to have DMH, a lot of people from DMH come in and talk to us about what happens, what services do we have available when someone attempts suicide, or for a family when someone dies by suicide. So that's going to be a chunk of time, okay? Then we're going to look at the 988 crisis line and zero suicide. So during the 988 testimony, we will talk about the funding and is it sustainable? What else do we need to do? And we're going to talk about zero suicide initiative. We're going to talk about community education, and we have Vermont Department of Health and Department of Mental Health in for that. So what are we doing? And I've sent them a long list of questions because they're working with 2 grants already. So we want to really understand, they've given us a broad overview. What are they already doing? And then what do they or we think are missing in the process that we could potentially put in legislation? Then we're going to look at suicide prevention in schools, and we have invited Agency of Education, Department of Health, and Department of Mental Health. Again, really talk about what's happening today, where do they think there are gaps, and is there anything we can be doing now to move forward? And then we're also, one of the pieces in this bill that I do want us definitely to pull out and discuss is the suicide fatality review team. So there's already in legislation a child fatality review team. So every time a child dies in Vermont, they review the data and then we gather that and we can use it to determine, well, what can we do, right? So what's causing children to die? We want to add a suicide fatality review board so we can really understand why people are dying by suicide and what things can we put in place. And we can say education in school and all these things, but unless we're really doing a deep dive into why people are dying, we don't really know. So I'd like us to look at that and we'll get some testimony on that. So those are the broad topic areas. I know a couple of people reached out to Alyssa. If more people have ideas, please reach out to Alyssa and I, and we'll make sure we work it into testimony. We just have to remember we have 4 days to get it out, which means we have testimony Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and would be able to vote Friday. And, as long as we vote by the close of business on Friday, it would get out on time for crossover.
They don't have to be presented. Okay, I got it in my head that it needed to be on the floor.
No,
It just needs to be voted out of committee.
and we can work as late as we want every day to
We
just crank bills through if we
can.
want.
So considering
I'm
that
good with that.
considering that VDH and DMH have loads of resources and whatnot already available online. And whatever, goes without saying. I've rarely seen or heard folks in this committee speaking about minority resources for suicide prevention or postvention. I'm in a district, especially in a school, a large school with minority majority. Language access is a huge issue, not just for those students, but for their families.
Right.
It's tremendous. I would love to bring someone in who can speak to that. And I know it's an issue that the administration is also looking
Yeah.
to address.
Okay.
But I would like to hear from someone in the community.
Can
I'd
you
be
find
happy to put
someone?
us in touch with someone, or I know there are folks that we've had speak at the Vermont Suicide Prevention Center. We've had them come from ASFSP or whatever. I can give you a list, Alyssa, if you're interested.
Please,
Yep, that'd be great.
and it's now on my list.
I have a suggestion too, that we consider how to reach out to the Health Equity Advisory Commission on this issue. Because they're looking at issues of health equity and just, I don't know, just a thought. I know their recent report was on provider training and not this issue, but there might be some benefit to just reaching out to them. And then the second thing was, oh no, I don't want to forget it. It had to do with Health Equity Advisory Commission, and there was someone else I thought, or something else. It might come back to me in like a split second. So I'll wait and see if it does. Oh yes, I remember. The National Guard, because
Yes.
I did speak with the Adjutant General about, and he's very, or I should say their administration is very committed to addressing veteran suicidality. So just maybe hearing what they're up to and seeing how we can collaborate with them and support their efforts and learn from them, you know, so getting better, and maybe even hearing directly from some veterans.
Okay. Leslie?
So I appreciate your talking about going into deep dive of cause. And it's kind of interesting to go through the populations. You know, we had that population list of all the people at risk. I've been thinking a lot about poverty and growing up with trauma and generational trauma and how that leads to depression and suicide. And I'm not sure if this bill's an appropriate place for that conversation, and I know you want to move fast, but I would like to have that conversation.
So, you know, you had sent me
Yeah, I did.
that thing, and honestly, that is really what a review board, those are the types of things that they are looking at.
So I'd like to make sure that that's explicit then.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they look at the circumstances surrounding it, because you can't make policy and you can't find solutions if you don't actually know, you know, the circumstances behind. And, you know, all the things that you had listed, drug use, depression, trauma, abuse, poverty,
Despair, yeah.
you know, those are things, you know, I mean, like if you think about that, and I encourage you to go on and read the child fatality review board. Sorry, I lost the word fatality. Those reports are all on our reports page. And it literally goes into a deep dive of every unnatural child death and the circumstances behind it. And actually makes recommendations about things that we can do to mitigate that.
I think there's a component too about, you mentioned provider, about, you know, last night, some of the members of this committee went to a legislative suicide prevention, what's that? Briefing. And there were folks there speaking about some of the clinical tools and screenings that providers around the state are using. And I know as part of Zero Suicide, there's a huge effort to implement screenings and tools and early interventions in primary settings, especially to get people to treatment as part of a coordinated prevention effort. And I'd like to hear more about that because I think that is one way of getting upstream. And with all of the investments that we're making into places like FQHCs, I learned last night that it's really important that we give clinicians the tools so that they're comfortable asking the really difficult questions and they know how to channel folks to those resources through using things like
Fantastic suggestion, and Mari actually had the suggestion as well. So.
And so keep sending suggestions. And I also want to be clear, I mean, we may have this testimony next week and walk away thinking there is a lot already happening. We can tweak, we can add for report backs, we can suggest things, right? So, I don't want anyone to think we're moving too fast. I also don't want anyone to think we're going to come out of here with some big, 20-page bill, because I think there's still a lot happening.
That's an important thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening.
We can't solve world hunger here.
We could.
I wish we could.
I don't know Vermont hunger, but we can solve Vermont hunger.
So, Alan,
World hunger of suicide.
sorry, Alan, I forgot you
Oh,
had.
that's okay. Well, the point was you heard what I was saying, and I feel if I want to dig into this, and we should do it, but we should do a complete job. She said, minorities, poverty, you've got home life,
Right.
you've got bullying in schools, you've got
Right.
drugs.
Right.
I hope we cover it all.
So we're not going to cover it all because, as Art just said, we can't solve all the problems. But we're going to hear about what the schools are doing about bullying. We're going to hear what the schools are doing about suicide education. And we might say, wow, the schools are really doing well. There's not much more we think that could be done. But hey, we want to hear in a year, that all these things are still happening or something. But we will work through this as we have with everything else. And there's going to be things we set aside and there's going to be things we want to hear more testimony on. It's just the way the process works.
When you schedule testimony, I've been struggling with this as I look at reports that previous legislators have requested that are still rolling in on our website. How do we consider those recommendations? A lot of them are good and still timely. And how do we incorporate those recommendations going forward? Because there's some good stuff. Like I want to lift up those two and build on that progress. Brian.
So those, as you're reading reports and as you want to take up them then come to me and let's talk about how to weave that through whatever we're doing or set aside time to do that. This first part of the year, if you remember, we spent a lot of time on education, right? Yeah. We spent a lot of time on budget and then we did a couple bills. So this next part of the session and then going into next year, we'll have more time to do things like you're asking. Yeah. Art and then Brian.
Well, it kind of builds what Daisy said. I hope that this bill is the most important bill that we have on that board to do. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on suicide, and it's a worthwhile thing to spend a lot of time on. But we've spent a lot of time on suicide. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There may be other things there that are deserving.
That's the next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that before crossover, we do the best we can to act on what information we have, and then any reports that we've missed or that come in after, the Senate also gets them, so we can speak to senators about getting testimony and weaving stuff in while it's in the Senate, and then if they fail to do it when it does, they often amend our bills and send them back. Not every, sometimes they just approve it, but that's rare in my experience.
But we do the same thing.
Yeah, and so what'll happen is then if they don't add it, when it comes back, we could take some testimony and try to add or modify things. So this is just like the first chapter. So we have a few more chances this year. And then because it's the beginning of a biennium, we do have next year. One thing I would advocate for is us strategizing this year about what we're going to do next year so that when we come in here, we can crank some bills out and not go so slow, because we'll have a sense as a committee by the end of this year, what do we need to follow up on and what did we take testimony on that we didn't finish? And some committees, they do this thing. I don't know if we would consider doing it. Like Like the Energy and Technology Committee did it with AI bills I introduced where they couldn't get them out by crossover in the first year. So they started taking testimony at crossover, and every week there was an AI day, and they would have like 2 hours of AI testimony. And then over the summer, they had a little group. It was a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent from the committee meeting. And they took the two AI bills, weaved them into one, came back to the committee, took testimony on that bill, and then passed it by crossover. And so that's how it was like it was a deliberative way to really.
Coordinated.
Yeah, so I would suggest that if there's any issue that we're looking at, like we got some of the suicide stuff out of the way, but we might want to look and I know you plan to do that.
Yep.
But it's like maybe how do we use the rest of the year in summer so that when we come in next year, we're ready to pass a few bills out by crossover that we all have consensus on. You know, like we've already worked through our debate.
So,
And I just want to say that the most recent report, recommendations, suicide prevention from 2020, I just emailed to the
Great.
entire.
great,
Really
perfect.
appreciate that.
Okay, so I said 12:30 and we're late. So the last topic, before I let everyone go and enjoy your break. So when we come back, before crossover, we have this and a couple other things as our priority. And then we have an open slate. So what I'd like everyone to do is review the bills that are in our committee. You can do that on our webpage. And if you have things that are high priorities for you, send me an email and I'll gather all of that and we'll make a plan and a way to move forward for the rest of this session. And we will be taking up whatever Senate bills that we wish to take up that come over. Right now, we just have one, but we will have more coming our way, I'm sure. So at some point over the next 10 days, shoot me an email if you have some, priorities up there or priorities that are not a bill, but you want us to discuss whether it leads to a bill or just we should be looking at this in the healthcare system. So it doesn't have to be something that leads to legislation.